Professor Singh, let's break it down. Let's break it down for our viewers. A lot of people will not have that span of history. One, what is the issue at stake here? Sir? That's one. And secondly, what makes Chinese more very sensitive about it? Let's decode it
Uh,
for our viewers.
okay, thank you, Karthikya. Last December, Chinese Communist Party celebrated crossing 100 million party cadre. Now imagine that people in China who claim and identify themselves as Buddhists have crossed 350 million, more than three times the number of the Chinese Communist Party, and they have very strong allegiance to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Worldwide, of course, there are 7.7 Tibetans, of which 6.5 million are in China. And of that, I said 350 million are about, sort of focusing on Dalai Lama as their symbol. So here, Chinese are worried that, depending on what Dalai Lama says and does, can impact their domestic politics very clearly. Now, read that with the historical experience of Tsarist Russia, British India, and of course, Chinese Empire trying to control Tibetan Plateau. And from 1911 onwards, Britishers kind of working to carve out a special identity for Tibet to declare that this is an independent entity and therefore Chinese have only suzerainty on it. And initially, Americans wanted Tibet to be with Chinese, but after Korean War, they also used Tibet as an instrument against China. So Chinese have suspicions with external powers. They have also concerns about their own population, siding with the Dalai Lama much more than siding with the Chinese Communist Party. And in that sense, now the possibility of Dalai Lama saying that reincarnation will happen in a free world, indicating it not in China, and whether, the new process will allow the trust to go into China in doing that search and recognition is not possible.
Professor, when you say free world, what is that geographical aspect of the free world? Can you just explain that for our viewers? Does it mean the Indian
It
side? Does it mean Cambodia? Where is this free world?
It would broadly mean, in terms of where Tibetan population is, for example, not Buddhist population, but much more, I think Tibetan Buddhism is what we are talking of. India has about 100,000 Tibetan people in India. United States and Europe have another number of about 25,000 plus and minus. So when we talk of free world, it could be in India, but also it could be some other country other than India, which will create its own challenges. Now, if the potential reincarnation is happening outside India, where will he be located? Will he come back to McLeodganj in India? How will India react to that situation? How will China react to that situation? So I think those are all speculations as of now. But let me also underline to your viewers that, His Holiness once had mentioned that he is going to live up to 113 years. Now, if that happens to be the future for reincarnation as a subject matter, then of course we have nothing to worry in the immediate. But the fact that he's finally confirmed that he is going to have reincarnation, that the Chinese will not be, legitimate the authority to identify and recognize that he's creating a trust and that trust is going to do it, is an indication that China has to really worry even right now about how indications are as to how the Dalai Lama wants to deal with this issue. In 1980s, Chinese tried to reconcile with Dalai Lama, but that didn't lead us anywhere. So in that sense, I think it's a serious concern for China in terms of domestic stability, turmoil, and so on. It's concern for China how the major powers are going to play on this issue and connect it to human rights and so on. And I think India will have to play very careful in terms of how do we deal with it. In case there is a situation of Dalai Lama being 14th Dalai Lama being no more there, where will you build his memorial? Is it in India? This is the first time in history a Dalai Lama has a burial place outside Potala Palace. So even if India tries to say, we don't recognize central administration of Tibetans in India, we want to keep away from these things. India will be entangled in such situation in case such incarnation process begins. So I think it is good that we start thinking on these issues, and therefore I think appreciate the Chinese concerns and make Chinese understand India's limitations being a democratic country. And that is the kind of approach India has towards all religious sects, that we allow them to, determine their own affairs on their own. And in that sense, I think it's also an issue that India and China will have to tackle over a period of time. The sooner they begin to talk about it is better. They will be able to manage it perhaps better with minimum cost to their relationship. They are just coming out of that Galwan incident of 2020, and now there's no new issues cropping up in that sense. So there are serious concerns in China. There are serious issues,
But
challenges
I
for
think that's
India-China
but I
relations.
think that's the basic issue. If you look at post-colonial India-China relationship.
Concerns in China. There are serious issues,
But
challenges
I
for
think that's
India-China
but I
relations.
think that's the basic issue. If you look at post-colonial India-China relationship, Tibet is at the heart of it, sir.
Indeed, Tibet is at heart of it. But if you look at how India, in fact, Chinese have often, if you look at post-independence history, often used India to approach and cultivate Tibetan leadership in India. Repeatedly, this has happened. And of course, when China became much more powerful, it started directly talking to India in a very different fashion. And not just India, but many other countries have, over a period of time, kind of sidelined this issue of Tibet when they want to deal with China. And that is also a reality which has seen that even Dalai Lama trying to seek an approachment with Chinese, sometimes saying that he's not going to have reincarnation, sometimes saying he might be born as a woman. But I think today's statement is very clear. He's confirming that reincarnation will happen. He's also clearly legitimizing his own trust to be the
I
one
think
to
that
start that process.
actually that's an important word you have used, Ambassador Sikri. It all boils down to legitimacy. I think that's the word. Who will legitimize it? Will it be New Delhi? Will it be Beijing? Or will it be widely published in all the foreign newspapers? In fact, it was on the front page of all the web editions. Professor Singh, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. What makes this such a issue around the world is fundamentally the contestation between Tibetans trying to celebrate and preserve for posterity their Tibetan Buddhism traditions versus China's increasing political ambitions and security concerns. And that has seen, of course, increasing monitoring and syncretization of all minorities in China, all religions in China. To begin with, Chinese communists were different than Europeans. They were not atheists the way Europeans were. They wanted to allow personal religious freedoms, and certain extent of that has continued. And as Chinese became prosperous, they have become much more visible in terms of celebrating their personal religious preferences over a period of time. But increasingly, there have also been very strong regulations, and particularly during Xi Jinping's time, monitoring and regulation is the buzzword for all religious sects, particularly the Tibetans in China. So, in that sense, yes, there is a freedom. But if you look at historic examples of 1995, what happened to Panchen Lama, later what happened to Karmapa Lama, I think it's very likely that Chinese are preparing to also prop likewise their own Dalai Lama in case the process of reincarnation has to begin with.
Are you
And
saying there
that
can
would
be two
again,
Dalai Lamas?
there have not been two Panchen Lamas, two Karmapa Lamas, but let's see if there is going to be two Dalai Lamas, and that would make
Okay.
the contestation even more complex, because if the future two Dalai Lamas are hosted, one in India and one in China, this is going to really, I think, create major challenges for our bilateral relations.
Absolutely. Ahead of his 90th